my son passed away. That's when my granddaughter asked to live with me. At the custody hearing, my daughter-in-law said, "The old woman can't even buy her own medicine." But when I walked into the courtroom, the judge went pale and said, "All rise. This court was built under her name. I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. They say the worst pain a parent can endure is burying their child. At 68, I never imagined I'd be standing in front of my son David's casket, watching them lower him into the ground on a gray October morning. The rain had stopped just before the service began, but the dampness clung to everything like grief itself. David was only 42. A heart attack, they said. Just collapsed at his construction site one Tuesday afternoon and never got back up. No warning signs, no previous health issues. One moment he was laughing with his crew about weekend plans. The next moment he was gone. Life has a cruel way of reminding us how fragile we really are. I stood there in my black dress, the same one I'd worn to my husband's funeral 15 years ago, feeling the weight of loss settling into my bones. The cemetery was small, intimate. David would have liked that. He never cared for big crowds or fancy displays. Just like his father. After the service, people came to me with their condolences. Neighbors, David's co-workers, a few old friends from high school. Their words were kind but hollow. What do you say to a mother who's lost her only child? There aren't words for that kind of emptiness. But then I felt a small hand slip into mine. I looked down to see Emma, my 12-year-old granddaughter, standing beside me. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked so much like David at that age. It took my breath away. "Grandma Bernice," she whispered, squeezing my hand tight. "I miss Daddy so much." I knelt down and pulled her close, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "I know, sweetheart. I miss him too." My voice caught in my throat. This little girl had lost her father, and I was all she had left of him. Melissa, David's wife, stood a few feet away, accepting sympathy from the other mourners. She was 35, 15 years younger than David had been, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that somehow hadn't smudged despite the tears. She'd always been particular about her appearance, even at her husband's funeral. As the crowd began to thin, Emma looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. Anything." She glanced over at her mother, then back to me. "Can I come live with you? I don't want to be alone with Mommy. She's always angry now, and she doesn't like talking about Daddy." My heart broke all over again. This child needed stability, needed love, needed someone who would keep her father's memory alive instead of trying to bury it along with him. "Emma, what are you doing?" Melissa's sharp voice cut through our moment. She strode over, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. "Come on, we need to get to the reception." Emma's grip on my hand tightened. "Mommy, I was asking Grandma if I could stay with her for a while." Melissa's face hardened. "Absolutely not. You're coming home with me where you belong." I stood up slowly, my arthritic knees protesting. "Melissa, maybe it would be good for Emma to have some time to process everything. My door is always open." "Your door?" Melissa let out a cold laugh. "Bernice, look around you. Look at yourself. You live in that tiny apartment. You can barely make ends meet on your Social Security, and you want to take care of a 12-year-old? Be realistic." The words stung, but I kept my voice calm. "I raised David just fine on my own after his father died. That was 30 years ago. You're old now. You can't even afford your own medications half the time. I've seen you putting prescriptions back at the pharmacy because they cost too much." Heat rose in my cheeks, but not from shame, from anger. Yes, I lived simply. Yes, I was careful with money, but not because I had to be, because I chose to be. There was a difference, though Melissa had never bothered to understand it. Emma tugged on my coat. "Please, Grandma, I promise I'll be good. I won't cause any trouble." Before I could answer, Melissa grabbed Emma's arm, perhaps a bit too firmly. "That's enough. We're going home. Now." Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she didn't resist as her mother pulled her away. She looked back at me over her shoulder, and I saw desperation there that cut me to the quick. "Melissa, wait," I called after them. If Emma wants to stay with me, maybe we should discuss it properly. Melissa turned back, her expression like ice. There's nothing to discuss. You're not getting your hands on my daughter. I know your type, Bernice. You're lonely, your son is gone, and now you think you can just take Emma as some kind of replacement. It's not happening. She dragged Emma toward their car, leaving me standing there in the cemetery, surrounded by the lingering scent of funeral flowers and the sound of my own heart breaking. That night, I sat in my small living room, staring at the photo of David on my mantelpiece. He was 5 years old in the picture, grinning with a missing front tooth, his arm around a scraggly puppy we'd rescued from the shelter. I'd kept every photo, every report card, every drawing he'd ever made. The walls of my apartment were covered with memories of my boy. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Emma, whispering into the receiver. "Grandma? Mommy's in the shower. I wanted to call you. Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay?" "No." Her voice was so small. "Mommy says we're going to move. She says there's nothing left for us here now that Daddy's gone. She wants to take a job in Phoenix with her sister." Phoenix. That was 1,200 miles away. "Emma, listen to me. Do you really want to come live with me? It's not a game. It's a big decision." "Yes, more than anything. Mommy doesn't understand. She wants to pretend Daddy never existed. But you loved him too. You'll help me remember him, won't you?" Tears ran down my cheeks. "Of course I will, honey. Your daddy was the best thing I ever did with my life. Then please don't let her take me away. Please fight for me, Grandma." The line went quiet, and I knew Melissa had caught her on the phone. A moment later, I heard Melissa's voice in the background, angry and sharp. Before the line went dead, I set the phone down and looked around my modest apartment. Melissa was right about one thing. It didn't look like much. The furniture was old but well-maintained. The carpet had seen better days, and the kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people. But it was filled with love, filled with memories, filled with everything Emma needed to heal from losing her father. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my bedroom closet and moved aside the old coats and dresses to reveal a small safe hidden behind them. My hands shook as I entered the combination, numbers I'd memorized but tried to forget. Inside were documents I'd hoped never to need again. Legal papers, financial statements, and a business card for the best family attorney in the state. I'd put this life behind me when my husband died, choosing to live quietly, simply, without the complications that came with who I used to be. But Emma needed me now, and for her, I'd step back into a world I'd left behind 15 years ago. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I still knew by heart. "Morrison, Caldwell and Associates. How may I help you?" "This is Bernice Patterson. I need to speak with James Morrison immediately." There was a pause. "Mrs. Patterson? Is this really you?" "Yes. And I need him to take a case, a custody case." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. I'll put you right through." As I waited for James to come on the line, I looked at David's photo again. I'd failed to protect him from his own heart, but I wouldn't fail to protect his daughter from a mother who saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. The fight for Emma was about to begin. James Morrison agreed to see me that very afternoon. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, but his voice on the phone carried the same warmth it always had. Some people never change, and James was one of the good ones. His office was in the same building downtown, though he'd expanded to take up the entire 15th floor. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled when I gave my name. She seemed to recognize it, though I couldn't imagine why. I'd been out of that world for so long. "Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Morrison will see you right away," she said, leading me through a corridor lined with awards and diplomas. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Just water, please." My throat felt dry as desert sand. James appeared at his office door, and I was surprised to see how little he'd aged. His hair was completely silver now, but his face was still sharp, his handshake still firm. He was probably in his early 60s, about 5 years younger than me. "Bernice." He pulled me into a gentle hug. "I'm so sorry about David. I wanted to come to the service, but I wasn't sure if you'd want me there." I understood. My old life and my new life had been carefully separated for 15 years. David knew almost nothing about who his mother used to be, and I'd preferred it that way. Thank you, James. I appreciate that you respected my privacy. He led me into his office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The walls were covered with photos of him with judges, politicians, and prominent citizens. In one corner, I noticed a small framed picture of me and my late husband, Robert, at a charity gala, probably taken 20 years ago. I was surprised he'd kept it. So, he said, settling behind his massive oak desk, you mentioned a custody case on the phone. Tell me what's happening. I explained about Emma, about Melissa's plans to move to Phoenix, about my granddaughter's desperate plea for help. James listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad. What's your relationship with the mother like? He asked when I finished. Strained. She's always seen me as an obstacle. David used to joke that Melissa thought I was too involved in their lives, but the truth is, I kept my distance. I didn't want to interfere. And now? Now my granddaughter needs me, and I won't let her disappear into Arizona with a woman who sees her as a burden. James leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Bernice, you know I'll help you however I can, but I have to ask, are you prepared for what this will involve? Custody battles can get ugly, especially when there's a deceased parent involved. The surviving parent typically has all the legal advantages. I know it won't be easy. It's more than that. Melissa will attack everything about you. Your age, your living situation, your income. She'll make you look incapable of caring for a 12-year-old girl. I thought about my small apartment, my simple clothes, my careful budgeting at the grocery store. To anyone looking from the outside, I probably did seem like an old woman living on the margins. What if I told you that financial capability wouldn't be an issue? I said quietly. James raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I reached into my purse and pulled out a bank statement I'd printed that morning. I slid it across the desk to him. His eyes widened as he read the numbers. This is your current balance? One of several accounts. I watched his expression change as the reality sank in. I've lived simply by choice, James, not by necessity. He looked up at me with new understanding. Why didn't David know about this? The question I'd been dreading. Because I wanted him to make his own way in the world. Robert and I discussed it before he died. We agreed that our son should build his own life, earn his own successes. If he'd known about the money, it would have changed everything. So you let him struggle? Let him work construction jobs and worry about bills? I helped when I could in small ways. When Emma needed school supplies or clothes, I'd slip Melissa some cash and tell her it was from my Social Security. When their car broke down, I'd loan them money from my savings account, just enough to cover repairs. But I never let them know the full extent of what I had. James shook his head, but he was smiling. You're remarkable, Bernice. Most people in your position would have used their wealth to control their children's lives. Money has a way of corrupting relationships. I've seen it happen too many times. But now you're willing to reveal it? For Emma, yes. She needs stability, security, and love. I can provide all three. James picked up his pen and started making notes. This changes everything. Melissa won't be able to claim financial incapacity. In fact, with your resources, you can provide Emma with opportunities she'd never have otherwise. I don't want to spoil her, but I want her to have choices. Private school? If she wants it. Or the best public school in the district. Whatever helps her thrive. College fund? Already established. Has been since the day she was born. James leaned forward, and I could see the lawyer in him getting excited. Bernice, do you have any idea what Melissa's financial situation looks like? I know David carried most of the household expenses. He had some life insurance, but not much. Maybe $50,000. Enough to get by for a year or two if she's careful. And this job opportunity in Phoenix? Working for her sister's real estate company. Melissa has no real work experience. David supported her so she could stay home with Emma, at least in the early years. James was writing rapidly now. This is very good for us. A stable, loving grandmother with unlimited resources versus an inexperienced mother planning to uproot a grieving child to pursue an uncertain job opportunity 1,200 miles away. What are our chances? Better than I initially thought. Much better. He set down his pen and looked at me seriously. But Bernice, You need to understand something. Once this starts, there's no going back. Melissa will discover who you really are. The whole story will come out. I'd known this moment would come eventually. I just hadn't expected it to be under these circumstances. I'm ready for that. And Emma? How will she react when she learns her grandmother isn't the struggling widow she's always believed you to be? That question kept me awake at night. Emma knew me as the grandmother who shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons, who made her birthday gifts by hand instead of buying expensive toys. Would she think I'd been lying to her all these years? I'll explain it to her when the time is right. She's a smart girl. She'll understand. James started outlining our strategy. We'd file a petition for custody based on the best interests of the child. We'd demonstrate my ability to provide a stable home environment, excellent schools, and emotional support during Emma's grief. We'd highlight the disruption that moving to Phoenix would cause in Emma's life. What about character witnesses? He asked. I haven't maintained many relationships over the years. I've kept to myself mostly. What about your volunteer work? I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. How do you know about that? Bernice, you can hide from a lot of people, but you can't hide from your lawyer. I know about the Children's Hospital, the Scholarship Fund, the homeless shelter. You've been quietly supporting half the charitable organizations in this city. I asked them to keep my involvement private. They have, but if we need character witnesses, they'll speak for you. The meeting lasted 2 hours. James explained the legal process, the timeline, the potential challenges we'd face. As I prepared to leave, he walked me to the door. One more thing, he said. You might want to consider updating your appearance for court. Not that there's anything wrong with how you dress, but first impressions matter with judges. I looked down at my simple navy dress, my worn leather handbag, my practical shoes. You think I look like a poor old lady? I think you look like someone who's been hiding her true self for 15 years. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Robert's funeral. I opened the other side of my closet, the side I'd sealed off like a tomb. Behind a protective sheet were clothes I'd forgotten I owned. Designer suits, silk blouses, elegant dresses, shoes that cost more than most people's rent. I pulled out a charcoal gray suit and held it up to the light. It still fit perfectly. I'd maintained my figure over the years, partly from worry, partly from the simple meals I prepared for myself. In the mirror, I saw 2 different women, the Bernice who shopped at discount stores and worried about every penny, and the other Bernice, the one who'd once moved through society with confidence and grace. For Emma, I'd have to become both. The loving grandmother she needed, and the powerful woman she'd never known existed. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Melissa. We need to talk, she said without preamble. What about? I know you put Emma up to calling you yesterday. I know you're filling her head with ideas about living with you. Emma called me because she's grieving and scared, Melissa. She needs support. What she needs is to move forward, not cling to the past. We're leaving for Phoenix next month. My grip tightened on the phone, over my dead body. There was silence on the other end, then Melissa's cold laugh. Is that a threat, Bernice? Because if you're thinking of trying to stop me, you should know that I've already consulted with a lawyer. You have no legal standing. Emma is my daughter, and I'll decide what's best for her. We'll see about that. You can't afford a legal fight with me. We both know that. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. You might be surprised what I can afford, Melissa. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, thinking about the battle ahead. Melissa had no idea what she'd just started, but she was about to find out. The weeks leading up to the custody hearing were torture. Melissa wasted no time launching her campaign against me, and she was more vicious than I'd anticipated. It started with the neighbors. Mrs. Chen from apartment 3B stopped me in the hallway with a concerned expression. Bernice, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? I heard from someone that you're trying to take Emma away from her mother. The way she said it made it sound like kidnapping. I'm hoping Emma can come live with me, yes. She's having a hard time since David died. Mrs. Chen nodded sympathetically, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. It's just that raising a 12-year-old at your age, it's a big responsibility. And with your finances. My finances are fine. But even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. Mrs. Chen had seen me counting coupons at the grocery store just last week. She'd watched me put back a bottle of aspirin because I claimed I couldn't afford the name brand. The conversation left me unsettled. If my own neighbors were questioning my capabilities, what would strangers think? 3 days later, I found out. I was at the pharmacy picking up my blood pressure medication when I overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. Can you believe she thinks she can take care of a child? At her age? I know. My sister lives in her building, says the old lady can barely take care of herself. It's selfish, really. That poor little girl needs stability, not some desperate grandmother trying to fill the hole in her own life. I stood there frozen, clutching my prescription bottle, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. They were talking about me like I was some pathetic creature deserving of pity rather than respect. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine from Emma's school principal. Mrs. Patterson, this is Dr. Williams at Riverside Elementary. I wanted to let you know that Mrs. Cooper, Emma's mother, has informed us that you may attempt to pick up Emma from school without permission. We've been instructed not to release Emma to you under any circumstances. If you have questions about this policy, please contact our main office. My hands shook as I replayed the message. Melissa was systematically cutting me off from my granddaughter, turning everyone against me before the custody hearing even began. James called that afternoon with more bad news. Melissa's attorney filed a motion requesting a psychological evaluation for you, he said. They're claiming that your grief over David's death has impaired your judgment. That's ridiculous. Of course it is, but it's also smart. They're building a narrative that you're an unstable elderly woman trying to replace your dead son with his daughter. I closed my eyes, feeling the walls closing in. What do we do? We fight back. The psychological evaluation will show you're perfectly competent. And I've been doing some research on Melissa's background. Did you know she's been married twice before? David never mentioned that. Her first marriage lasted 6 months when she was 19. The second was annulled after 3 weeks. She has a pattern of making impulsive decisions when she's stressed. How does that help us? It shows instability, a history of running away from problems instead of facing them, just like she's doing now with the move to Phoenix. But even as James tried to reassure me, I could hear the concern in his voice. We were fighting an uphill battle, and Melissa was winning the war of public opinion. The psychological evaluation took place on a gray November morning in a sterile office downtown. Dr. Sandra Mills was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. She asked me hundreds of questions about my childhood, my marriage, David's death, and my relationship with Emma. Why do you think you're better equipped to raise Emma than her mother? She asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Because I love her unconditionally. Because I understand what she's going through, having lost David myself. Because I have the time and patience to help her heal. But you're 68 years old. Don't you think a child needs a younger, more energetic guardian? The implication stung. Age brings wisdom, Dr. Mills. And I'm in excellent health. What about financially? Raising a child is expensive. Private school, college, medical bills. Can you provide for Emma's future on a Social Security income? I hesitated. This was the moment of truth, but something held me back from revealing everything. Maybe it was the skeptical look in Dr. Mills's eyes, or maybe I wasn't ready to completely abandon the simple life I'd built. Either way, I gave a carefully measured response. I can provide everything Emma needs. I've always managed my finances responsibly. Dr. Mills made a note, and I knew it wasn't favorable. The hearing was scheduled for the first Monday in December. As the date approached, I found myself questioning everything. Maybe Melissa was right. Maybe I was too old, too set in my ways, too isolated from the world Emma would need to navigate. I was having these doubts on Saturday morning when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Emma standing in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. "Grandma!" She threw herself into my arms, sobbing against my shoulder. I pulled her inside quickly, looking around to make sure Melissa wasn't following. "Emma, honey, what are you doing here? How did you get away from your mother?" "She went to the store. I told her I was sick and needed to stay home." Emma wiped her nose with her sleeve. "Grandma, she's packing everything. She says we're moving to Phoenix, whether the judge says we can or not. She says you'll never find us there." My blood ran cold. She said that? Emma nodded miserably. She's been saying awful things about you. She told Aunt Carol that you're crazy, that you're trying to steal me because you can't accept that Daddy's gone. I knelt down and took Emma's hands in mine. Sweetheart, look at me. Do you think I'm crazy? No, I think Mommy's the one who's crazy. She threw away all of Daddy's things, his clothes, his books, even his pictures. She said we needed to start fresh. But how can we start fresh if we pretend Daddy never existed? My heart broke for this child who was losing her father all over again through her mother's desperate attempts to escape grief. Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. On Monday, there's going to be a hearing where a judge decides where you should live. Your mother's lawyer is going to say some unkind things about me. They're going to try to make it seem like I can't take care of you. But that's not true. I know it's not true, and you know it's not true. But sometimes grown-ups make decisions based on what they think they see, rather than what's really there. Emma gripped my hands tighter. What if they don't let me live with you? I couldn't lie to her. Then we'll figure out another way. I promise you, Emma, I will never stop fighting for you, no matter what happens Monday. We spent the next hour looking through photo albums, talking about David, sharing memories that Melissa wanted to erase. When it was time for Emma to go home, she hugged me fiercely. I love you, Grandma. You're the only one who still loves Daddy the way I do. After she left, I sat in my living room staring at the legal documents spread across my coffee table. James had prepared everything meticulously, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Not with the story Melissa had crafted about the poor, unstable old woman trying to steal her daughter. I thought about the clothes hanging in my closet, the bank statements locked in my safe, the life I'd hidden away for 15 years. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether to keep hiding or step back into the light. For Emma, I knew what I had to do. Sunday night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about everything that could go wrong, every way the hearing could turn against me. Melissa had painted me as a desperate, delusional old woman, and I'd done nothing to contradict that image. At 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep and made coffee. The apartment felt smaller than usual, cramped and shabby in the gray pre-dawn light. I could see it through a stranger's eyes now, through the eyes of a judge who would be deciding Emma's future. The worn furniture, the faded curtains, the chipped dishes in the kitchen sink. It all looked exactly like what Melissa claimed it was, the home of someone barely getting by. But appearances could be deceiving. And tomorrow, I would prove just how deceiving they could be. I spent the morning preparing carefully. I showered and styled my hair, choosing each piece of clothing with deliberate precision, not too fancy, nothing that would seem out of character for the woman everyone expected to see, but neat, dignified, respectable. James had advised me to arrive early, to get familiar with the courtroom before the proceedings began. As I walked into the courthouse that Monday morning, I felt the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on me. The security guard smiled kindly as I passed through the metal detector. "Good luck today, ma'am," he said, and I realized he'd probably heard about the case through courthouse gossip. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with rows of wooden benches and tall windows that let in the winter sunlight. James was already there, organizing his files at the plaintiff's table. He looked up as I approached and gave me an encouraging nod. "Ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath, thinking about Emma's tears, about David's memory, about all the years I'd spent hiding who I really was, as ready as I'll ever be. What I didn't expect was just how brutal Melissa's attack would be, or how completely she would try to destroy me in front of a room full of strangers. But I also didn't expect what would happen when the judge finally looked up and recognized the woman sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table. Everything was about to change. Melissa arrived 15 minutes late, making a grand entrance with her attorney, Richard Blackwood. I'd heard of Blackwood before. He specialized in high-stakes custody battles and had a reputation for destroying opposing parties with surgical precision. Melissa looked stunning in a navy blue dress and pearl necklace, every inch the grieving widow and protective mother. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the tears she'd undoubtedly shed for effect. Blackwood was an imposing man in his 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. They took their seats at the defendant's table without acknowledging me. Melissa kept her eyes forward, playing the role of the dignified mother being persecuted by an unreasonable in-law. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair and serious eyes. The bailiff called the court to order, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. This is a petition for custody filed by Bernice Patterson against Melissa Cooper regarding the minor child Emma Cooper. Judge Harrison began, reading from his documents. Mr. Morrison, you may present your opening statement. James stood and approached the bench. He spoke eloquently about my love for Emma, my desire to provide stability during her grief, and my concerns about uprooting her from her familiar environment. He painted a picture of a devoted grandmother who wanted only what was best for her granddaughter. But I could see in the judge's eyes that he was thinking exactly what everyone else had been thinking. Nice words, but what could an elderly woman on Social Security really offer a growing child? Then Blackwood rose for his opening statement, and the real assault began. Your Honor, he said in a voice that carried absolute authority. This case is about a grief-stricken elderly woman who has lost touch with reality. Mrs. Patterson, while undoubtedly well-meaning, is attempting to use this court to fulfill her own emotional needs at the expense of what's truly best for Emma Cooper. He gestured toward me dismissively. Mrs. Patterson is 68 years old, lives alone in a small apartment, and survives on a fixed income. She has no experience raising a child in today's world, no understanding of modern technology, modern education, or the challenges facing young people in the 21st century. I felt each word like a physical blow. The worst part was that some of what he said was true. I didn't understand social media or smartphones or half the things Emma talked about with such excitement. Furthermore, Blackwood continued, warming to his theme, Mrs. Patterson has demonstrated increasingly erratic behavior since her son's death. She has made unreasonable demands on Mrs. Cooper, attempted to interfere with Emma's schooling, and has shown signs of the kind of obsessive attachment that can be harmful to a child's development. He paused dramatically. Mrs. Cooper, on the other hand, is a young, healthy, devoted mother who has been offered an excellent employment opportunity in Phoenix. This represents a fresh start for both mother and daughter, an opportunity to build a new life together away from the painful reminders of their loss. Judge Harrison was taking notes, nodding occasionally. I could see the case slipping away from me with each word Blackwood spoke. Your Honor, we will show that Mrs. Patterson is simply not equipped, financially or emotionally, to provide for a 12-year-old child. While her intentions may be good, the road to custody disputes is paved with good intentions. James objected to the characterization, but the damage was already done. When Blackwood called his first witness, I knew we were in trouble. Dr. Mills, the psychologist who had evaluated me, took the stand and delivered her report with clinical detachment. Mrs. Patterson shows signs of complicated grief, she testified. While she is not clinically unstable, she demonstrates an unhealthy fixation on her deceased son and has transferred that attachment to his daughter. In my opinion, her desire for custody stems more from her own emotional needs than from what would be best for the child. And what about her financial capacity to care for Emma? Blackwood asked. Mrs. Patterson was evasive when questioned about finances, which suggests embarrassment about her limited resources. Based on our conversation, I would estimate she lives on approximately $1,000 to $1,200 per month from Social Security, which would be inadequate for supporting a growing child. The testimony continued for an hour. Every answer painted me as a pathetic, delusional old woman living in the past. When James cross-examined her, he did his best to challenge her conclusions, but the core narrative remained unchanged. Then Melissa took the stand. She was magnificent in her role as the suffering widow. Her voice trembled at all the right moments. Her eyes glistened with tears that never quite fell. She spoke about her love for Emma, her dreams for their future, her excitement about the new opportunities waiting in Phoenix. Mrs. Patterson has been increasingly demanding since David's funeral, Melissa testified, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She calls constantly, shows up unannounced, and fills Emma's head with unrealistic ideas about living with her. Can you describe Mrs. Patterson's living situation? Blackwood asked. She lives in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a building that's seen better days. The elevator doesn't work half the time, and I've seen her searching through couch cushions for change to buy groceries. The lie hit me like a slap. I had never searched for change, never struggled to buy groceries, but who would believe that now? Has Mrs. Patterson ever expressed concerns about your parenting? Blackwood continued. Melissa's lip quivered. She told Emma that I don't love her father's memory the way I should. She said I was trying to erase David from our lives, which isn't true. I'm just trying to help Emma move forward instead of living in the past. And the medication incident Mrs. Patterson mentioned? She returned prescription medications to the pharmacy because she couldn't afford them. I offered to help, but she was too proud to accept it. That's when I realized how precarious her situation really is. More lies, delivered with such conviction that I almost doubted my own memory. Melissa was spinning a story that painted her as the caring daughter-in-law and me as the pathetic, intrusive burden. When it was time for cross-examination, James tried to poke holes in her testimony, but Melissa was well prepared. She had an answer for everything, always delivered with just the right amount of emotion. Mrs. Cooper, James said, isn't it true that Emma has specifically requested to live with her grandmother? Emma is 12 years old and grieving her father. She's not capable of making rational decisions about her future right now. But don't you think she should have some say in where she lives? Melissa's eyes hardened for just a moment before the mask slipped back into place. I think she needs a mother who will make the hard decisions for her, not enable her to avoid dealing with reality. The morning session was a disaster. During the lunch break, James and I sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse, barely touching our sandwiches. It's not going well, he said finally. No, it's not. Bernice, if there was ever a time to reveal your true financial situation, it's now. We need something to shift the narrative. I stared out the window at the people walking by, ordinary people living ordinary lives. What if it backfires? What if the judge thinks I've been lying all this time? What if he awards custody to Melissa because he thinks you can't afford to raise Emma? I knew James was right, but something held me back. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was the knowledge that once I stepped back into that other life, there would be no going back to the simple existence I'd built. Let me think about it during the afternoon session, I said. When we returned to the courtroom, Blackwood called his final witness, a social worker who had visited both households. Mrs. Patterson's apartment is clean but cramped, the social worker testified. There would be no privacy for a growing girl, no space for friends to visit comfortably. Mrs. Cooper's home, while modest, offers much more appropriate living space for a child. And your overall assessment? While Mrs. Patterson clearly loves Emma, love alone isn't sufficient. Emma needs stability, resources, and a guardian who can provide for her changing needs as she grows into adolescence and young adulthood. Then came the moment that would change everything. Mrs. Cooper has informed me that she cannot afford the emotional or financial burden of a lengthy legal battle, the social worker continued. She's prepared to move to Phoenix with or without the court's permission, rather than subject Emma to ongoing conflict. Judge Harrison looked up sharply. Are you saying the defendant intends to relocate regardless of this court's decision? Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, my client simply wants to move forward with her life and believes the Arizona opportunity is in Emma's best interest. That wasn't my question, Counselor. Is Mrs. Cooper planning to move to Phoenix, whether or not I grant custody to Mrs. Patterson? The courtroom fell silent. Even Melissa seemed to realize that her social worker had just made a crucial error. My client wants to do what's best for her daughter, Blackwood said carefully. Answer the question. Blackwood looked at Melissa, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, Your Honor. If necessary, Mrs. Cooper will relocate to protect Emma from ongoing family conflict. Judge Harrison set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. So you're telling me that if I don't grant custody to Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Cooper intends to take Emma out of state, effectively making any future visitation impossible? Your Honor, Mrs. Cooper has job opportunities in Arizona that's enough. Judge Harrison's voice cut through Blackwood's explanation. He turned his attention to me for the first time since the hearing began, really looking at me instead of just through me, and in that moment, something shifted in his expression. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were trying to place a half-remembered face. He studied me for several long seconds while the courtroom waited in tense silence. Then slowly, recognition dawned. Judge Harrison's face went pale. He blinked once, twice, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His hands gripped the edge of his bench, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "All rise." The entire courtroom stood, confusion rippling through the spectators. Melissa looked around nervously, clearly sensing that something had changed, but not understanding what. Judge Harrison stood as well, his eyes never leaving my face. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight and formality that transformed the entire atmosphere of the room. "This court recognizes Mrs. Bernice Patterson." He paused, and the silence stretched like a held breath. "All rise. This courthouse was built with funds donated by the Robert and Bernice Patterson Foundation." The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Melissa's face drained of color. Blackwood's confident posture crumbled. Even James looked stunned, though he'd known some version of the truth. I remained standing, feeling 15 years of carefully maintained anonymity crumbling around me. The simple old woman everyone had been dismissing was gone, replaced by someone I'd almost forgotten I used to be. Judge Harrison continued, his voice now carrying the full weight of recognition and respect. "Mrs. Patterson, I had the honor of meeting you at the dedication ceremony 12 years ago. You and your late husband donated $15 million to build this courthouse complex. The number hung in the air like an impossible dream. $15 million. More money than anyone in that room had ever seen, donated by the quietly dressed elderly woman they'd all been pitying. Furthermore," Judge Harrison said, his composure returning as he fell into his judicial role, "I am aware of your family's ongoing philanthropic work throughout this community. The Patterson Children's Hospital Wing, the Patterson Scholarship Fund, the Patterson Community Center." Melissa's lawyer was frantically shuffling through his papers as if he could find some explanation for this impossible turn of events. Melissa herself sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, staring at me like I was a stranger. Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom formally. "This court will take a 30-minute recess to allow all parties to reassess their positions." As the gavel came down, the room erupted in whispers and shocked conversations. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat and Emma's voice echoing in my memory. "Please fight for me, Grandma." The fight was far from over, but everything had just changed. During the recess, the hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and shocked stares. I found myself at the center of attention in a way I hadn't experienced in 15 years, and it felt both foreign and strangely familiar. James pulled me aside into a small conference room, his eyes wide with something between admiration and exasperation. "Bernice, why didn't you tell me about the courthouse? About the $15 million? I sank into a chair, feeling suddenly exhausted, because I hoped I wouldn't have to. I wanted to win this case as Emma's grandmother, not as some wealthy benefactor. You do realize what just happened in there, don't you? You've completely changed the trajectory of this case." Through the conference room window, I could see Melissa and her lawyer in intense discussion. Blackwood was gesturing wildly while Melissa sat motionless, staring at nothing. "James, I need you to understand something. Everything I'm about to tell you has to be handled carefully. Emma doesn't know any of this." He pulled out his notepad, but I waved it away. "No notes, not yet. This is just between us for now." I told him everything. About Robert's successful investment firm, about our decision to step away from public life after his death, about the choice to let David make his own way without knowing about our wealth. We had everything money could buy, I explained. The mansion, the social obligations, the constant attention. When Robert died, I realized that none of it had made us truly happy. The happiest moments were the quiet ones, just the three of us at home. "So you gave it all up?" "I sold the house, closed most of the social accounts, and moved into that little apartment. I kept enough investments to live comfortably, but I wanted a simple life. I wanted to be David's mother, not the wealthy widow everyone wanted to befriend or exploit." James leaned forward. "And David never suspected?" "I think he wondered sometimes. When Emma needed something expensive, like her surgery when she was 7, I always seemed to have enough money saved up. But he never asked directly, and I never volunteered the information. What about Emma's college fund that you mentioned? I smiled for the first time that day. She has $2 million waiting for her when she turns 18. More if she goes to graduate school. James sat back in his chair, shaking his head. Bernice, you could have saved us all this trouble. One look at your financial statements would have ended Melissa's case before it started. Maybe. But then Emma would have learned about the money in a courtroom, surrounded by lawyers and judges. That's not how I wanted her to find out. A knock at the door interrupted us. The bailiff peered in. Mrs. Patterson? Judge Harrison would like to see you in his chambers before we resume. Judge Harrison's chambers were elegantly appointed with law books, family photos, and several framed certificates. He stood when I entered, extending his hand with genuine warmth. Mrs. Patterson, I want to apologize for not recognizing you immediately. You look different than you did at the dedication ceremony. I've been living differently, Your Honor, by choice. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I have to ask, and please forgive the directness, but why have you been allowing everyone to believe you're struggling financially? The question I'd been dreading, but also the one that needed to be answered honestly. After my husband died, I realized that our wealth had become a barrier between us and the people we loved. Everyone wanted something from us. Every friendship came with an agenda. I decided I wanted to live authentically, to be valued for who I was rather than what I had. Judge Harrison nodded thoughtfully. And your son never knew? David knew I had some savings. He thought I was comfortable but not wealthy. I helped him and his family when they needed it, but always in small ways that seemed reasonable for a widow on Social Security. That must have been difficult, watching him struggle when you could have easily helped. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But Robert and I agreed before he died that we wanted David to build his own life, make his own successes and failures. Money has a way of robbing people of that opportunity. Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying his hands. Mrs. Patterson, I have to tell you, this changes everything about your case, not just legally, but ethically. I need to understand your true motivations for seeking custody of Emma. My motivations haven't changed, Your Honor. Emma needs stability, love, and someone who will honor her father's memory while helping her build her own future. The only difference is that now, you know I can provide for her financially as well as emotionally, and you're prepared for Emma to learn the truth about your wealth? I thought about my granddaughter, about her simple joy in our small apartment, about the way she treasured the handmade gifts I gave her because she thought they represented sacrifice on my part. I'll tell her gradually, in a way that helps her understand why I made the choices I did. She's a smart girl. She'll adapt. What about the impact on her relationship with her mother? That was the question that kept me awake at night. Melissa will have to decide whether she wants to be part of Emma's life or continue fighting against what's best for her daughter. I hope she chooses love over pride. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Patterson, I have one more question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any part of your motivation for this custody battle that comes from a desire to punish Melissa for how she's treated you? I considered the question carefully. Your Honor, I'd be lying if I said Melissa's behavior hasn't hurt me. But this isn't about punishment. It's about Emma. That little girl has lost her father, and now her mother wants to uproot her from everything familiar to chase a new life in another state. Emma needs roots, needs stability, needs someone who understands that healing takes time. And if I award you custody, how do you plan to handle the relationship between Emma and her mother? I want Melissa to be part of Emma's life. I'll encourage regular visits, phone calls, whatever it takes to maintain their relationship. But I won't allow Emma to be used as a pawn or abandoned when the next opportunity comes along. When we returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. The whispers died as I walked to my table, and I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. Melissa avoided eye contact entirely, her face pale and drawn. Judge Harrison took his seat and called the court to order. Before we continue, I want to address what occurred before the recess. This court has confirmed that Mrs. Patterson is indeed a significant philanthropist in our community, and her financial capacity to care for Emma is not in question. Blackwood stood hesitantly. Your Honor, We request a brief continuance to reassess our client's position in light of this new information. Denied. Your client has had ample opportunity to research Mrs. Patterson's background. The fact that she chose to live modestly doesn't change her legal standing or her qualifications as a guardian. Judge Harrison turned to me. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like to hear from you directly about your plans for Emma's care and education. I stood, feeling more confident than I had all day. Your Honor, Emma would live with me in a larger apartment or house, whichever she prefers. She would attend the best schools available, whether public or private, based on her interests and abilities. She would have access to every opportunity to develop her talents and pursue her dreams. And her relationship with her mother? I encourage and support regular contact with her mother. I would never try to replace Melissa in Emma's life, but I will provide the stability and continuement that Emma needs to heal from her father's death. What about Emma's wishes in this matter? Emma has repeatedly expressed her desire to live with me, Your Honor. She feels safe in my home, and she knows I'll help her remember her father rather than pretend he never existed. Judge Harrison made notes as I spoke. Then he addressed Melissa directly. Mrs. Cooper, in light of the information revealed today, do you wish to modify your position regarding custody? Melissa stood slowly, her hands shaking. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Your Honor, I need time to think. I didn't know. I never realized. Blackwood put a restraining hand on her arm, but Melissa shook him off. I thought she was just a lonely old woman trying to take my daughter away from me. I said horrible things about her. I tried to make everyone believe she couldn't take care of Emma. Tears began flowing down her cheeks, genuine ones this time. But Emma loves her. Emma has always loved her grandmother more than she loves me sometimes. And maybe that's because Mrs. Patterson has always put Emma first, and I haven't. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Mrs. Cooper, are you changing your position on the custody request? Melissa looked at me for the first time since the revelation, her eyes filled with something that might have been regret. I don't know what's best anymore. I thought moving to Phoenix would help us start over. But Emma doesn't want to start over. She wants to remember her father, and she wants to be with the person who loved him most, besides her. She wiped her eyes with the tissue. I've been so angry since David died. Angry at him for leaving us. Angry at the world for being unfair. Angry at her for grieving differently than I do. Maybe I'm not the mother Emma needs right now. The admission hung in the courtroom like a prayer. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw not my adversary, but a young woman who was drowning in grief and making decisions from a place of fear rather than love. Judge Harrison was quiet for several minutes, reviewing his notes and studying both of us carefully. I'm going to recess this court until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I want both parties to consider whether there's a way to resolve this matter that serves Emma's best interests, while preserving her relationships with both her grandmother and her mother. As the gavel came down, I found myself looking at Melissa with something approaching compassion. She had attacked me viciously, tried to destroy my reputation, and nearly succeeded in taking Emma away from me. But she was also a widow struggling with loss, a young mother terrified of making the wrong choices for her daughter. Tomorrow, we would learn Emma's fate. But tonight, I had some difficult conversations ahead of me. The first would be with Emma, who deserved to know the truth about her grandmother before she heard it from anyone else. The second would be with myself, as I prepared to step fully back into a life I thought I'd left behind forever. That evening, I sat in my small living room waiting for Emma to arrive. I'd called Melissa after court and asked if Emma could spend the night with me. To my surprise, she'd agreed without argument. When Emma knocked on my door at 6 o'clock, her face was flushed with excitement and worry. Grandma, Mommy told me something crazy happened in court today, but she wouldn't tell me what. She just kept crying and saying she was sorry. I pulled Emma into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Come sit down, sweetheart. We need to have a very important conversation. Emma curled up beside me on the couch, her brown eyes wide with curiosity. Are you in trouble? Did something bad happen? No, honey, I'm not in trouble. But there are some things about your grandmother that you don't know, things I should have told you a long time ago. I began slowly, carefully, watching Emma's face for her reaction. I told her about her grandfather Robert, about his successful business, about the life we'd lived before she was born. We had a big house and fancy cars and went to parties with important people, I explained. But when your grandfather died, I realized that none of those things made me happy. The only thing that mattered was family. Emma listened intently, her forehead creased in concentration. So you were rich, but you didn't want to be rich anymore? Something like that. I wanted to live simply, to be valued for who I was rather than what I owned. So I sold the big house and moved here, and I decided to help people quietly, without anyone knowing. But why didn't you tell Daddy? Why didn't you tell me? This was the hardest part. Because I wanted your father to make his own way in life, to be proud of what he accomplished himself, and I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I could buy you. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Is that why you always made my birthday presents instead of buying them? Because you wanted me to know you loved me? Tears pricked my eyes. That's exactly why, sweetheart. But you could have bought me anything I wanted? Yes, and someday, when you're older, I'll help you with college and whatever dreams you want to pursue. But right now, I want you to understand that the most important things in life can't be bought. Emma nodded solemnly. Like missing Daddy. Money can't fix that. No, it can't. But love can help us carry that sadness, and time can help us remember the happy parts more than the sad parts. She leaned against me, and I stroked her hair. Grandma, is that why Mommy was so mean about you in court? Because she didn't know you were actually rich? The question pierced my heart. Your mother wasn't being mean, Emma. She was scared. She thought I couldn't take good care of you, and she was trying to protect you the only way she knew how. But she said awful things about you. I heard her telling Aunt Carol that you were crazy and desperate. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes when people are hurting, they say things they don't really mean. Your mother is still grieving your father, just like we are. She's been making decisions from a place of fear instead of love. Emma sat up and looked at me seriously. Are you going to be mean to her now that you won? What do you mean, honey? Well, now everyone knows you're important and she was wrong about you. Are you going to punish her? Out of the mouths of babes. Emma, I hope your mother will always be part of your life. I'm not trying to take her place. I'm just trying to give you a safe home where you can grieve and heal, and remember your daddy without having to pretend he never existed. And if I live with you, will I still get to see Mommy as much as you want to? And when she's ready, maybe she can even live here sometimes too if that's what you want. Emma's eyes widened. Really? You'd let Mommy live here even after she tried to take me away? If it would make you happy and help you have a relationship with both of us, yes. Emma threw her arms around me. I love you, Grandma, and I'm proud that you're important, but I loved you just as much when I thought you were poor. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in my bed while I took the couch, I stared at the ceiling thinking about the decision Judge Harrison would make in the morning. But for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. Whatever happened, Emma and I understood each other, and that was what mattered most. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the previous day's revelation, and reporters sat in the back rows, notebooks ready. I'd dressed carefully in a navy suit from my hidden closet, looking more like the woman I used to be while still feeling like the grandmother Emma needed. Judge Harrison entered promptly at 9 o'clock, and the bailiff called for order. I've spent considerable time reviewing this case in the best interests of Emma Cooper, he began. This has been a complex situation involving grief, family dynamics, and significant financial revelations. He looked directly at Melissa. Mrs. Cooper, I understand you wish to make a statement before I render my decision. Melissa stood slowly. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept, but there was something clearer in her eyes than I'd seen in weeks. Your Honor, I want to formally withdraw my opposition to Mrs. Patterson's custody petition. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even I was surprised. I spoke with Emma last night, Melissa continued, her voice steady but emotional. I asked her what she really wanted, and she told me she wanted to live with her grandmother but still be able to see me whenever she wanted. She glanced at me, then back to the judge. Mrs. Patterson has always been a better grandmother than I've been a mother lately. She's patient where I'm impatient, stable where I've been chaotic, and she helps Emma remember David instead of trying to forget him. Melissa's voice broke slightly. I love my daughter more than anything, but I've been so lost in my own grief that I forgot she was grieving too. Mrs. Patterson never forgot that. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Mrs. Cooper, are you certain about this decision? You understand that you're essentially agreeing to give up primary custody of your daughter. I'm agreeing to do what's best for Emma, even if it's not what's easiest for me. Mrs. Patterson has resources I don't have, not just financially, but emotionally. Emma needs stability right now, and I need time to figure out how to be the mother she deserves. She looked at me again, and this time there was genuine remorse in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, for everything I said about you, for everything I tried to make people believe. You didn't deserve that. I stood up. Your Honor, may I respond? Go ahead, Mrs. Patterson. I turned to face Melissa directly. I accept your apology, and I want you to know that my door is always open to you. Emma needs both of us in different ways, and I hope we can work together to help her heal. Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. Very well. Given Mrs. Cooper's withdrawal of her opposition and the evidence presented regarding Mrs. Patterson's capacity to provide excellent care for Emma, I hereby grant custody to Mrs. Bernice Patterson. He paused, looking at both of us. However, I'm also ordering a generous visitation schedule for Mrs. Cooper and requiring that both parties participate in family counseling to help facilitate this transition and ensure Emma's emotional well-being. The gavel came down and it was over. Emma was coming home with me. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Melissa approached me hesitantly. Mrs. Patterson, I know I have no right to ask this, but would it be possible for me to have dinner with Emma tonight? To explain why I'm not taking her to Phoenix? Of course. In fact, why don't you join us? I'm making Emma's favorite meal to celebrate. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. You'd do that? After everything? Melissa, we're both going to be part of Emma's life for many years to come. We can either fight each other or support each other. I'd prefer the latter. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new house, a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom home in Emma's old school district. It was nothing like the mansion Robert and I had once shared, but it was perfect for a grandmother and her 12-year-old granddaughter. Emma was at the kitchen table doing homework while I prepared dinner. Melissa had moved to Phoenix to take the job with her sister, but she visited every other weekend and called Emma 3 times a week. The transition hadn't been perfect, but it was working. Grandma, Emma said, looking up from her math worksheet. Jenny at school asked if we're millionaires now that everyone knows about your money. I smiled. What did you tell her? I told her it doesn't matter how much money you have if you don't have people to love. And I told her you loved me just as much when you had to use coupons at the grocery store. My heart swelled with pride. That's exactly right, sweetheart. But Grandma. Yes? I'm glad you don't have to pretend to be poor anymore. It must have been hard, always having to act like you couldn't afford things. I set down my wooden spoon and looked at my granddaughter, this wise little girl who understood so much more than most adults. It was hard sometimes, but it taught me something important about what really matters in life. What's that? That love isn't about what you can give someone. It's about showing up, being present, and caring about their happiness more than your own. Emma grinned. Is that why you fought so hard to keep me? That's exactly why. That evening, as Emma video chatted with her mother in Phoenix, I sat in my living room looking at the photo albums spread across my coffee table. Pictures of David as a boy, of Emma growing up, of quiet moments that had meant everything. Tomorrow, I would attend a board meeting for the Patterson Foundation, stepping back into my role as a philanthropist for the first time in 15 years. But tonight, I was simply Emma's grandmother, helping with homework and planning weekend activities. I had everything I needed, just as I'd always had everything I needed. The only difference was that now I didn't have to hide it anymore. The phone rang, and Emma's voice carried from the kitchen. Grandma, it's for you. It's Mommy. I picked up the extension, surprised to hear from Melissa on a Tuesday evening. Hi, Melissa. How are things in Phoenix? They're good. Actually, really good. I wanted to call and thank you. Thank me for what? For giving me the space to figure out who I am when I'm not drowning in grief. for showing me what putting Emma first really looks like, and for keeping your word about staying in touch. I smiled. How are you doing, really? Better. I started seeing a therapist, and I'm learning how to carry David's memory without letting it consume me. I miss Emma terribly, but I can see that she's thriving with you. She misses you too. She counts the days until your visits. I know, and I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Phoenix is good for now, but someday I want to move back. I want to be closer to Emma as she gets older. You'll always have a place in her life, Melissa, and in mine, if you want it. After we hung up, I found Emma curled up in her bed with a book, her dark hair spread across the pillow like her father's used to be. Good book? I asked, tucking her in. It's about a girl who goes on adventures but always comes home to her family, Emma said sleepily. Sounds perfect. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Daddy knows I'm okay now? I kissed her forehead. I think your daddy knows you're exactly where you belong. As I turned off her light and closed her door, I whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for the strength to fight when it mattered, and for the little girl sleeping peacefully down the hall who had taught me that the best gifts in life are the ones you can't buy with any amount of money. Emma was home, we were home, and that was worth more than all the wealth in the world. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.